Hello and welcome to Inside Europe, the weekly current affairs podcast and radio programme from DW, Germany's international broadcaster. I'm Kate Laycock in Bonn. This week, we're departing from our usual format to bring you an hour-long special that we're calling Alternative Economies. Concrete examples of European experiments with rethinking business as usual, ranging from the reformist to the downright radical. Expect everything from participatory budgeting right through to a science fiction-inspired manifesto for the workplaces of the future. Surprisingly, that's all here on Inside Europe.
Only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function: to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable.
That's actually a quotation that I've asked my colleague Gabriel Borrud to voice. It's from Milton Friedman, the American economist whose ideas on free market capitalism and monetary economics influenced leaders like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, so by shaping the world in which we live today. And no matter where you sit on the political spectrum, there is probably one thing that we can all agree upon. That is that we are living through a moment of crisis. You just have to turn on the news to understand that. So, what are the ideas that are lying around right here in Europe? The ones that might point to a better, fairer way of ordering our economies, our institutions, our cities, our businesses, and our workplaces. It's a question that I've had on my mind for a while. So, off and on over the course of the past 6 months, I've been collecting hopeful stories for you. Stories of European attempts to do things differently and create a more equitable world in the process. They range from the macro to the micro, from the reformist to the radical. And I cannot wait to share them with you. Since this is Inside Europe, I thought that we would start at the macro-European level first. And what could be more macro-European than the EU budget itself? And by EU budget, I mean the long-term framework which decides how much money will flow and where. The current long-term budget runs from 2021 to 2027 and amounts to €1.2 trillion, which is roughly equivalent to 1% of the EU's gross domestic product. When the next long-term budget comes into effect in 2028, there will be something very different about it. For the first time ever, a randomly selected pan-European citizens panel will have had the chance to feed into the decision-making. From March to May 2025, 150 ordinary citizens from all 27 EU member states have been meeting to discuss where they think the EU's spending priorities should lie. To what extent their feedback will end up influencing the Commission's final decisions remains to be seen. What is certain, however, is that as far as experiments with participatory budgeting go, this is about as big and as multinational as it gets. And, as Zoe Bass reports from Brussels, for many of the participants, the experience seems to have been life-changing.
I thought that I was being cheated. I thought somebody was trying to con me. So the first time I got into a fight with the person from the European Union, because I thought it was a jip.
The way I got chosen is actually kind of a funny story. I was at school, completely unaware of this going on. These people came with leaflets about the citizens panel with all the information, how to fill it out. So my dad filled it out, the document, me unaware, still at school.
You just heard Stanley there, a retiree from the Netherlands, followed by Anne Rue, a secondary school student from Ireland. They are just two of the 150 European citizens selected to participate in the very first Citizens' Assembly on the EU budget. Yes, you heard me right, the budget. The question they tackled: how should the next big EU budget be spent? This is no trifling task, given that the current spend amounts to 1.2 trillion euros. That's roughly 1% of the EU's GDP. This budget panel is part of a broader push from the European Commission for citizen involvement. Through the use of citizens' panels like this one and an online citizens' platform, Europeans can be more directly involved in decision-making at the EU level. But back to Brussels. Enthusiasm and energy levels were high, but no one said that divvying up 1.2 trillion euros was going to be easy, as Jorgi, father of two from the Netherlands, explained.
The subject is really, really difficult. So I expected it to be a bit more simplified than it was. In the end, we ended up with diplomacy.
Participants were drawn from the young and the old, the country and the city dwellers. Some were in favour of the EU, others less so.
My idea of the European Union was an organization that throws money away. That is still my expectation of the European Union. But what I hope is going to happen is they're going to ship up.
Yet, even if Stanley lacks faith in the European institutions, he was won over by the many young people of Europe with whom he worked.
I've met about 5 or 6, 16, 17-year-old, and they're brilliant. We think we're great, but the children, they really do have the future.
One such young person was 18-year-old Jana from Austria, who found herself unexpectedly persuaded of the threat of war in Europe by a fellow participant.
War was like, no, we don't need war in Europe. That is nothing we have to prioritize. But then I heard him, and then I was like, if our very existence at a liberal Europe is at stake, we have to do something. And that was really where I was, war? Yeah, this is something we have to consider.
I tracked down the young man who was doing all this persuading, Dominicus, a student of international business from Latvia.
First, I just started listening to other people and understood that most of the EU, probably that isn't near the Eastern Front, doesn't really have this fear. And then I just started talking like from heart. I think that was the main point. And everyone was like, wow, this is not just random information or his opinion. It's probably a real problem.
Participants presented their final list of 23 recommendations to Budget Commissioner Piotr Serafin in the Commission headquarters in Brussels. Coming out on top, equal access to healthcare and medicines across European borders, followed by the development of rural areas and then jobs for young people. But how optimistic are participants that their ideas will find a way into the Commission's final budget proposal? Back to Jorgi.
I'm hopeful, but still a bit pessimistic. I need to see changes happen first before I start believing in them. But I'm curious what they will accept in their budget in the end.
The EU Commission will present their final budget proposal to the European Parliament and the Council in late July. They will also report back to all those involved in this panel, as Budget Director Stephanie Risco explains.
From my side, I want to tell you that your work is done, but it's not over, because there is more. In a few months, we are going to meet you again to explain to you how we took forward your recommendations. We will organize a feedback session where we will explain how our proposals for the next European budget take on board your advice and your recommendations.
Before, I didn't think much of the EU. We didn't see much of it in the news, and you'd never hear about the EU. But after coming to these panels and attending all of the sessions, I felt a complete change of heart. I feel that the EU can make such a big difference into the lives of citizens, but they need to take on the advice that's been given here. At the same time, what we're doing here is going to be so much help, and the EU can definitely make that happen.
Let's hope that the European Union can deliver for its citizens so that the change of heart experienced by those like Anne Roux and so many others will be justified. This is Zoe Bass for DW in Brussels.
Just a bit of Euro trivia at this point. The European Central Bank, or ECB, is headquartered in Frankfurt, Germany. The European Commission is headquartered in Brussels. So, if you were a nimble little think tank trying to influence European monetary policy on behalf of, quote, social justice and a livable planet, would you set up shop opposite the European Central Bank in Frankfurt or opposite the Commission in Brussels? Perhaps interestingly, in the case of not-for-profit Positive Money, the answer is B, in Brussels, opposite the Commission. Now, in terms of the trajectory of this Alternative Economies special, the folks at Positive Money are very much on the reformist end of the spectrum. They believe that the system can be tweaked and made fairer. One of the major tweaks that they're advocating for at the moment is nothing less than the full digitalisation of the euro. And with European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde amongst the leading advocates, it is something that is likely to happen. The question is how and on what terms. Terry Schultz paid Positive Money HQ a visit to find out.
Then we go for the park. We are there in 2 minutes.
Laura Casonato is describing the well-worn path from her office at the NGO Positive Money to what's known as the EU Quarter, the neighborhood that houses European Union negotiators and decision-makers in the European Commission, the European Council, and the European Parliament. These are the people Casonato, as the organization's senior policy officer in Brussels, wants to convince to adopt or advance policies that, in Positive Money's view, quote, redesign our economic system for social justice and a livable planet.
How many days a week do you have to walk to the Commission or the Parliament?
At least 3 or 4 times in a week. There were days in November where I think I spent more days at the European Parliament than here in the office or at home.
You just take a sleeping bag.
Yes, I made a joke with some friends of mine saying that I will put a tent in the European Parliament in their cafe.
That's how far Casonato's willing to go to talk to the people who can influence the issues Positive Money is working on. To understand the motivation, CEO Aurélie Maréchal suggests a look back at the events which prompted the creation of the organization in the UK shortly after the global financial crisis of 2008.
That time, 2008, 2009, was really a moment where there was a big realization that a lot of the financial system is revolving around private interest of a few private companies, private banks, and that there should be much more, not only of regulation of that financial system, but also more ownership of the people. At Positive Money, we want an economic system, and more specifically a financial monetary system, that serves the people, that is there to make sure that people live well and have the means to survive well on a healthy planet. And we definitely think that money is part of that.
One of the organization's priorities is the creation of a fully digital euro, virtual cash. This, advocates say, would reduce the dependency of consumers on credit cards or payment apps, most of which are owned by non-EU companies. That's one of the big reasons European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde has made clear she's in favor of a digital euro.
At present, a few foreign providers dominate Europe's payments landscape. Yes, there are a few member states that have their own respective payment system, but overall, it is dominated by foreign players, leaving us vulnerable to external pressures. As we face an increasingly digital future, we must prepare the ground for a digital euro. This will ensure the resilience and public good nature of our payment systems. It will also provide a platform for private innovation in digital payment.
Not everyone's a fan. There are concerns that a digital euro would give too much control to governments to potentially control access to cash. In addition, smaller banks have concerns. A 2023 survey by the Federal Association of German Community Banks found that if every depositor converted 3,000 euros in their accounts into digital euros, only 56 out of 714 community banks would be able to meet their required liquidity minimums. It would also be expensive to implement a digital euro system. Still, Positive Money's Laura Casanaro believes it would be better for EU consumers and for small and medium-sized businesses to have this independence from foreign service providers. And if transatlantic trade tensions have any upside, she hopes it's to demonstrate this.
I really believe that this can really give a push to, make some progress on this political dossier, because it's so crucial at the moment. So this is really the time to act on this.
The European Central Bank is due to make its decision by the end of this year on whether to move ahead with the digital currency. But it can't do that without legislation from the European Parliament. And that's why, for now, Laura Casanaro will keep camping out at the legislature, trying to move lawmakers along. Terry Schultz, DW, Brussels.
And having reimagined the euro, we will be reimagining the city next. That's Here with me, Kate Laycock, on Inside Europe. A 15-minute city is an urban planning concept where everything a person needs for daily life, work, school, healthcare, shops, parks, leisure, culture, is accessible within a 15-minute walk or bike ride from home. Kind of sounds like common sense, doesn't it? You'd think so, but such is our modern-day alienation from common sense that sometimes you just have to reinvent the wheel. And that is what has been happening right here in Europe, as I found recently when listening to Tamsin Walker's deep dive into 15-minute cities over on DW's Living Planet podcast, presented by Neil King.
The 15-minute city concept is the work of scientist Carlos Moreno. He's a Colombian-born professor at the Sorbonne University in Paris and expert in complex systems. Over 2 decades ago, he starts exploring how to rethink car-based urban living. Cities take up no more than 4% of the landmass on the planet, but more than half the world's population live in them. Urban areas are responsible for an estimated 70% of global CO2 emissions, and those emissions are driving the climate change that is connected to increasing extreme weather events around the world. Moreno sees the potential for reducing the carbon footprint of cities by addressing things like transport and infrastructure. Initially, he's just sharing with peers, but his ideas soon begin to ripple out further, and for some people, they are immediately relatable. It's 2020.
Je suis donc l'immense bonheur de proclamer Anne Hidalgo maire de Paris.
Ce choix, vous le confirmez aujourd'hui. Ce choix m'honore.
The mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, is re-elected following a campaign to turn the French capital into a 15-minute city. She wants to make each little district or arrondissement more self-sufficient. She wants them to have public green space, grocery shops, restaurants and cafes, education, sporting and health facilities. In short, she wants to transform Paris into a place where everything locals need can be found within 15 minutes of their home, all accessible with a short bike ride or walk. The plan is celebrated by some as a win for Paris and the climate, but it also coincides with controversial COVID lockdowns.
The breaking news, stay at home, that is the order tonight from 4 state governors as the coronavirus pandemic
as COVID-19 cases continue to surge across the country.
Frustrated about restrictions on personal freedoms, some interpret the 15-minute city idea as another way of controlling movement.
So there was legitimate concern over the lockdowns. There was harm to economic livelihoods, and I think that got conflated.
Given that the last thing most people want during the COVID era is further restriction, the misinformation doing the rounds hits a nerve, and it spreads. It's around that time that Dan starts to receive negative remarks in response to what he is posting about 15-minute cities.
Take out all and any infrastructure you see before it's too late, and we become 15-minute city prisoners.
Trying to control every aspect of life.
Authoritarianism in action.
NWO control agenda.
No, thank you.
There'd be just sort of random comments. Somebody would say, oh, this is a great idea. I hope 15-minute cities come to my town. And the next comment would be something like 15-minute prison, or no one would just walk in a cattle car willingly, and things like that. But then there were some that got more personal. Like there was one person that posted on Instagram, nice plans. We are all hoping you will die before it gets realized.
Is that something you just shrug it off? Or does it start to get under your skin?
Honestly, I disregarded the whole thing, or tried to, for a few months, until I saw that it was actually changing the discourse. I would say that's where it started to get me mad, not when they were attacking me. And to be clear, like what I experienced was nothing compared to what Professor Carlos Moreno has had to face. You know, he's received hundreds of death threats.
Living Planet's deep dive doesn't just leave the story there, of course. Yes, there was and is a backlash, but a good idea is hard to put down. And this one is finding resonance not just in Europe, but across the Atlantic as well.
The real solution is to go back to what the city was historically. The modern city of LA was little neighborhoods, little villages with little main streets. And then these villages were connected by the world's biggest trolley system, the Red Line system, which is made famous in the movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So we had the biggest trolley system in the world, but what it really just did was connected little neighborhoods. And they were these little walkable neighborhoods. And that's our history. And they all exist. The tracks are gone, most of them, but the neighborhoods are still there. And we actually have a metro system connecting a lot of them. So the pitch that we give for LA is, let's just build a lot of housing in these little walkable neighborhoods, and you can actually solve a ton of things at the same time.
Things such as boosting health by getting people moving, promoting human interaction and community building, which is linked to a reduction in loneliness and dementia, and responding to the climate crisis.
The climate emergency is at our door. It's come.
So for Lindsay and her colleagues, it's not only about reducing traffic, it's also about building climate-friendly homes.
They're courtyard buildings. They're residential over retail. And you have an elevator with a staircase that wraps around it usually. And you have 4 apartments on each floor, sometimes 2. So that's your classic building. And you can build to not need AC. And we, of course, know this because we've been building housing for hundreds of years before AC. So we know it's possible.
There is a whole half hour of 15-minute city gems to be found over on the Living Planet podcast feed. Meanwhile, here on Inside Europe, our Alternative Economies special is about to get radical, so do stay tuned. Or if you're listening via a partner station that's leaving us here, you can look up the full show wherever you get your podcasts. This is Inside Europe, and I'm Kate Laycock in Germany.
On Living Planet, we've got questions.
Is anyone trying to clean up this mess?
Big questions.
Should we really be sinking our money into this?
Questions that get to the bottom of things.
How much CO2 does a tree absorb anyway?
Your questions.
How often do you think we should use the reusable cups to compensate for the paper ones?
But don't worry, we've got answers too. Answers to help you navigate some of the biggest environmental issues of our time.
That's on Living Planet.
Find us wherever you get podcasts.
The ocean is vast, beautiful, and lawless. I'm Ian Urbina, back with an all-new season of The Outlaw Ocean. The stories we bring you this season are literally life or death. We look into the shocking prevalence of forced labor, mind-boggling overfishing, migrants hunted and captured. The Outlaw Ocean takes you where others won't. Available on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Inside Europe, the weekly current affairs podcast and radio programme from DW, Germany's international broadcaster. I'm Kate Laycock in Bonn.
We do not trust each other. I do not see authors on union congresses. I do not see Works Council members in meetings where they talk about solar punk.
That is Falco Blumenthal. He's the political secretary of IG Metall, Germany's biggest and mightiest union. US listeners here think Teamsters in terms of clout and symbolic status. And yes, you did hear him right. He was talking to me about solar punk. Falco Blumenthal's thesis is this. At a time of rupture, when no job is safe from technological change, when the climate's in breakdown and inequality is skyrocketing, then this is when we need to harness the power of science fiction in order to help us both warn against techno-dystopias, but also imagine futures of our own, utopias in which people and planet are placed centre stage.
We do not know what the work of the future will look like, but we should at least be able to imagine what we should want for the future of work, what we can hope for and what we must fear. And if our imagination has atrophied in the daily grind, then we have to turn to those who still can, and these are science fiction writers.
That is Falco Blumenthal's partner in this enterprise, Peter Seifert, a political theorist specialising in utopian studies at the Fresenius University of Applied Sciences in Munich. The union official and the academic teamed up first to hold a series of seminars under the star-speckled dome of Munich's People's Planetarium. There is a whole story in itself there, but that will be for another day. Then to edit a book titled Science Fiction, Labour Fiction, bringing together a whole host of different perspectives on the intersection between sci-fi and working-class struggle. A cross-pollination, Seifert tells me, with a long lineage.
In the beginning of the workers' movement, many of the so-called utopian socialists that invented not only fictional accounts of how the work situations or the production of things that are needed can be done better, but also tried to experiment how to do that. The daily struggle and the imagination went hand in hand. Then and later came more literary utopias. Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward from 1888 and William Morris's News from Nowhere from 1890. Very different in kind and style, but both read by many workers in the USA and in Great Britain respectively, inspiring the struggles of the day. They painted a picture of what they were fighting for.
But of course, it is not only left-wing thought that has taken inspiration from speculative fiction and sci-fi, a fact that union official Falco Blumenthal is very much aware of.
One of the examples we found was actually Elon Musk. Elon Musk quoted a fascist novel from the 50s by Werner von Braun, where the father of the V2, a weapon of mass destruction, wrote about a society where everybody works in unison, everybody is kind of sporty, everybody believes in the bigger goal, everybody believes in following orders. And this novel about how to conquer Mars was quoted by Elon Musk in his PR about his mission of all his companies to create a new civilization of worthy, sporty, strong, masculine, white people on Mars. In the novel 1984, one of the central sentences was, "Those who control the past control the present." This was derived from the experience of Nazism, of the mythology of S, as well as the Stalin experience of erasing the past or changing the past. One of our intuitions was that nowadays, when the past is not a reliable tool anymore to find instruments to deal with the present, then the power over prognosis becomes the basis of power to control people and institutions in the right here and now.
So, what do ordinary people like you and me, need in order to take control over our present? Our own stories, of course. And science fiction, neighbour fiction editors Falco Blumenthal and Peter Seifert have, in fact, commissioned just that.
Theresa Hannig is a science fiction author living near Munich, and she wrote a short story, Hand, Herz, Hose, so it's hand, heart and pants, about a future where most work is done by machines, but some things cannot be done by machines, and those are the only chances for humans to earn money. You will still need money in this future fantasy, but you almost have no chance to get some because most work is done by machines. So, in this setting, she wrote a nice short story about a woman that has very dangerous job to do because she's a saboteur. And I don't want to tell more. I think this short story should be translated into English and other languages and then be read by Deutsche Welle heroes.
Yes, I want them to rejoin our ranks, yes.
Not a pitch DW listeners hear every day. Falco Blumenthal is political secretary of Germany's IG Metall Union, and Peter Seifert is a political theorist specialising in utopias. Their book, Science Fiction, Labour Fiction, is out now, just in German for the moment. You don't always have to turn to science fiction to find tales of radically reimagined workplaces. Real-life examples are out there too. And that is exactly what we have coming up next. It's the story of a small Italian ceramics factory in Città di Castello in Umbria, Italy. Like so many other Italian factories, this one was threatened with closure when its owners decided to move production overseas, where labour would be cheaper. Instead of simply accepting their fate, however, 11 of the workers banded together to save their livelihoods and keep their local production alive. How did they do it? Megan Williams has been finding out.
A bustling weekday morning inside the large light-filled ceramic factory in the hills of Umbria, central Italy. Rows of tall racks hold gleaming glazed bowls and plates and platters adorned with Renaissance motifs. A worker takes slabs of coffee-colored clay and plops them into a pressing machine.
This is the press, and you can see we put the clay inside the stamp, and after the power of the press create the items.
You're making bowls, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. The bowl. This is the clay that produced to ourselves in another part.
Lorenzo Giornelli walks me through the factory, pointing to the styles and shapes tailored to customers in different countries. The company, Ceramiche Noi, exports far and wide. But not long ago, the factory was on the brink of shutting down. I'll never forget that day, says manager Marco Brozzi, when the factory owners announced they were moving operations to Armenia and laying off all 15 workers. Instead of accepting unemployment, Brozzi rallied his colleagues to seize an opportunity, using a special Italian law that lets laid-off workers get their unemployment insurance in a lump sum if they invest in a co-op. A national co-op fund threw in about a third more, bringing the total to almost €500,000, enough to buy machines and get the factory back up and running. Brozzi had a personal stake in saving the factory. His grandfather had founded it in 1952 and run it for decades before an investor bought it. The co-op structure has been a great fit, he says. We're a tight-knit group, so it came together pretty easily. For a larger company, it would have been tougher. But here, everyone gives their all, and I couldn't be happier with the choice we made. But Giornelli, who heads communications for the company, says there have been major challenges.
We must try to defend our work, to defend our handcraftship, to defend Made in Italy. Restart, but after 6 months arrived COVID.
Then energy prices shot up after Russia invaded Ukraine. But the co-op proved resilient, doing things like moving shifts to the early morning hours when electricity was cheaper. Giornelli says it's the stake workers have in the company that motivates them.
And if you don't work better, you danneggi anche te stesso.
He says you only harm yourself, which makes the selection of workers essential.
This, I think, is more difficult part to understand, more challenge to become cooperatives.
Ceramiche Noi is now a leader in Italian ceramics, exporting 90% of its products to Europe and North America. The co-op just bought its own warehouse, installed an energy-efficient kiln and solar panels, and has doubled its workforce, earning praise from European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen as a model of resilience and energy efficiency. 39-year-old Valentina Dugo, who handles everything from sourcing clay to painting and packaging ceramics, was the first new hire. I feel lucky in this job, she says. With 2 kids, the co-op supports me when they're sick or something comes up. It's never, why aren't you here, but go take care of your child. It's the ideal workplace for a mother. No small matter in a country where Italian workers rank as the least satisfied in the EU in the latest European workforce study, with only 43% of Italians saying they feel positively about their workplace. It's gone better than I had ever imagined, says manager Brozzi. And that factory in Armenia, after stripping the Italian warehouse of its machinery and cashing in on state incentives, it folded within a year. Megan Williams, DW, Città di Castello, Italy.
I'm actually hijacking this week's quiz segment with some exciting news. Inside Europe now has an easy-to-use space for voice messages. So, in addition to the usual insideeurope@dw.com mailing address, you can now go to speakpipe.com/insideeurope and leave us a voice message. Who knows, you might even hear yourself on the show. That address again, speakpipe.com/insideeurope. Now, it's confession time. All these exciting European examples of alternatives to business as usual. It was actually a conversation with an American that inspired me to start collecting them. Late last year, I spoke to John Buin, Director of Storytelling and Public Engagement at Duke University's Keenan Institute of Ethics and host of the Institute's rich and thought-provoking Scene on Radio podcast. That's Scene spelt SCENE. And if you're not already a listener, then I cannot recommend it enough. Anyway, at the time, John was in the process of wrapping up a series called Capitalism. He'd looked at capitalism's origins, spoiler, they were European, explored its triumphs and its limitations, and then he'd started to look for examples of how it might be done better. And what excited me about those examples were that so many of them were European. Why was that, I wondered?
Europe, for starters, is a place where many countries have what we would call social democracy. Actually, you would call social democracy. Americans hardly even use that phrase. But where you have what is really simply a kind of a blend of capitalism and socialism, right? Where you have free enterprise, capitalist corporations, and so on, but you also have a strong overlay of government programs, government-run industries, and a strong safety net, a strong welfare state, right, that provides lots of things that in the U.S. we don't have because we have generally opted for a much more sort of capitalism first, markets first, less government kind of approach. So, universal health insurance to start with, for goodness sake. And much stronger systems of public housing and college is paid for often in Western Europe. We don't have those things in the U.S. So that's one whole angle to that.
I then went on to ask John about some of the specific European case studies that he'd looked at. There was, for example, an ethical clothing company in Barcelona, and not just that.
We also go to Triodos Bank, which was founded in the Netherlands, but we went to the Barcelona branch, and it's a bank that will invest
That's
only
my bank.
in. Is it your bank?
It is my bank.
Right. So you're one of the 750,000 customers in Europe. As a customer, you have your savings account. Well, that money is only going to be invested in what they consider to be socially positive, socially valuable efforts like a wind farm. So, yes, there are people in business, in the for-profit business world, who are really trying to do better, to make capitalism more humane, more fair, more sustainable.
And at that point, I just had to ask, did John Buin believe that he would one day live to see that day, the day where we can all live in a fairer, more humane system?
I don't know. John Fullerton, who is a former J.P. Morgan investment banker, rising star in that iconic Wall Street bank, who had a change of heart. He thinks that we are already moving into a new era. He thinks the change will be as big as the shift from the medieval to the modern world, that we'll be in a different epoch. I think it's possibly true. I fear that kind of shift will happen because we have had a calamitous sort of breakdown.
What's the Milton Friedman quotation that only a crisis, real or imagined, can bring about change, and when it does, what matters is the ideas that are lying around? Is that about right?
Absolutely, right? I think that's a very important insight. And so in that sense, I am encouraged as a result of spending this time immersed in this question and talking to people who are thinking about these things more deeply than most of us are. Those folks and their practices will come to the fore when it becomes absolutely necessary. And I hope before it becomes absolutely necessary.
That was the conversation which started it all off. My thanks to John Buin, Director of Storytelling and Public Engagement at Duke University and host of the fantastic Scene on Radio podcast. And no, I am not going to apologise for using that Milton Friedman quote twice. It's a corker. Our own smorgasbord of European case studies continues. We have a socially inclusive cafe restaurant chain coming up for you next. That's here on Inside Europe with me, Kate Laycock. There is, in France, a chain of cafes with a certain je ne sais quoi about them. Actually, that's not quite true. I do know what the special atmosphere is down to. It's down to the fact that the Café Joyeux, or joyous cafes as they're called, are staffed by people with substantial cognitive differences, mostly autism and Down syndrome. Our Paris correspondent, John Lawrenson, has just become Café Joyeux's latest customer.
I'm in one of the most recent additions to the Café Joyeux chain. It's large and quite chic in what is quite an elegant, businessy neighbourhood, not far from the Champs-Élysées. There are 21 Cafés Joyeux now, in France, but also Brussels and Lisbon. The most recent is in New York, employing almost 200 people in all.
My name is Anne France. I am 36 and I'm a crew member at the Café Joyeux. I have Down syndrome. It slows me down. I find it difficult to understand things. I need to be able to take my time. But that's my only problem.
Et quand vous faites le service, par exemple, you seem to master waiting the tables very well.
That's because I know how to serve people. It's my job and I'm good at it.
Is this your first job?
No. Before this, I was in a business adapted for people with special needs, a laundry, because I really like laundry. But then I applied for a job here. I sent them a video application and they said it would be really good for me. And it's true, I've really flourished here and I take public transport on my own to come to work. I know how to do that too.
Why has it been such a flourishing experience for you working here?
Before, I didn't meet people like I do here. The customers, I mean. It's really important for me to meet other people, people from outside.
You've been here for 2 years?
Yes, but first I did a year's training with the Café Joyeux, and now I can do everything. Make the coffees, prepare and cook the food, wait the tables. I am versatile, like all the crew members. All of us can do everything.
Jokes too, says your colleague at the till.
That's because he's always joking, that one.
I settle down at a table where another waiter brings me my order. I'm waiting for Yann Bucaille, who founded the Café Joyeux 7 years ago. I've been told I'll know it's him if I look at his shoes. He wears trainers that don't match, like one red one and one blue one. I must ask him about that. I finish my cup of tea and still everyone's wearing matching shoes, really boringly actually. So I go and talk to a man in a suit eating a slice of quiche a couple of tables away about his choice of restaurant.
J'adore cet endroit.
I love this place, he says. There's a real warmth which is reflected in the sunny yellow that is the main colour. The staff are friendly and there's a lot of respect between the people. The service is very good with a lot of care and there's a good positive mood. A lot of people work in the financial sector in this neighbourhood. My office is just opposite. It's quite cold, the financial sector, but here it's a bit like a big family. Just now there are a couple of people hugging each other. We're lacking that today, a bit of love.
Un peu d'amour.
Yann arrives, tall, enthusiastic, a bit of the old je ne sais quoi, French charisma. I don't have to look at his shoes to know he's the boss. Ask him to tell us the story of how the Café Joyeux began.
Yeah, that's something that was not expected at all in our life with my wife. We were running this organization with this big sailing boat that we had built to have wheelchair access. And every cruise we embarked 30 people and a lot of people with disability. And the trigger of Café Joyeux was when I met this young adult called Theo with autism, and he said, "Captain, I heard you're an employer. Do you have a job for me?" And so I said, "No, I don't have a job for you." And his face, that was so joyful after a great cruise, became suddenly closed, and he became angry. And he said, "It's not fair. Because, yes, Captain, I have a disability, but I want to be useful, like you. I can have a job like you." And this was a sort of a switch for me. I realized how important it is to have a job in life, not to go for a sailing cruise. And I realized that in this society, especially when you look at the numbers, the system adds difficulties, adds sort of a disability to people who need more support. And it was a trigger for us and for my wife to say, let's find out what we can offer to these people. We are speaking about 7 million people with autism spectrum disability, or with other kind of difference like Down syndrome. In France, it's 700,000 people with autism, 65,000 people with Down syndrome, so it's over 1.2% of the overall population. It's a lot. It's growing, by the way. And less than 0.5% of this population have a job in a regular company, which is completely unfair.
While we're talking, the father of one of the employees comes into the cafe. Jan introduces us. Jacques is his name. His son Arnaud has been working in various Parisian Café Joyeux for 5 years.
Ça change beaucoup de choses parce que je vois Arnaud qui est joyeux, c'est le cas de le dire quand il va travailler.
It changed a lot of things because I see Arnaud happy when he goes to work. Already that, for a father, is wonderful. Also, it has given him independence, camaraderie with the other employee, and the feeling of being accepted for what he is. Arnaud has Down syndrome, so he's different insofar intellectually he understands things less well than the other people. On the other hand, with his heart, he understands things much better than the other people. His heart is effortlessly open.
Facilement, quoi. Sans faire d'effort, je dirais.
Ce qui veut dire, which is good for this job, I suppose, when it comes to making customers feel welcome.
Oui, et surtout, là, on va
Yes, and the little plus that he has is that he is easily happy. As long as people aren't against him, he's happy. It's the things that amaze me all the time with him. The smaller things make him happy.
Il est heureux pour un rien.
While I'm talking to Jacques, Jan motions that he has to go, and a few minutes later I realise I forgot to ask him about his wearing odd shoes. So I look it up on my phone and find this quote. It's to show that difference is an opportunity. It would be difficult to walk if we had 2 left feet. John Lawrenson, DW, Paris.
And that, dear listeners, is where I would like to leave you this week, in the joyous cafe of life, surrounded by smiles and friendly chat. If you don't want the conversation to end, you can drop us a line at insideeurope@dw.com or leave us a voice note at speakpipe.com/Inside Europe. This programme was produced by me, Kate Laycock, and Charlie Shield. Our sound engineers were Michael Springer, Jürgen Kuhn, and Gerd Georgi. Inside Europe comes to you from DW in Bonn.